Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Please consider subscribing. Let's have some fun. Story brought to you by Kresha Matay. My parents died in an automobile accident shortly after I was born. The probate court decided that I was to be raised by my mother's younger sister, my Aunt Lily, in accordance with my parents' will. My aunt, barely an adult herself, just 21 years old, was my only living relative. Little did the court realize that Aunt Lily unfortunately lacked the necessary knowledge, experience, and most importantly, attitude to raise me like a normal boy. That's not to say that Auntie raised me poorly, only much differently. Auntie had herself been brought up in a fatherless household. My grandfather had run away, leaving my grandmother to raise their 2 young daughters all by herself. Granny, after her husband left her, became a very disillusioned and spiteful woman, hating all men and teaching her 2 daughters that men as a gender should never be trusted. Somehow my mother overcame Grandma's teachings, met my father, got married, and had me. Aunt Lily, on the other hand, accepted my grandmother's opinions as fact and never dated, remaining, to my knowledge, a virgin. She was from the old school. This meant that I wasn't allowed to play with the other children if the group included any boys and even certain girls of whom she didn't approve, namely those who were impolite, rude, rough, loud-spoken, and or aggressive by her standards. Over a period of just a few years, she excluded every normal boy from my small circle of friends. This eventually excluded all the children, since those she didn't drive away choose not to play with me. Aunt Lily, by today's standards, raised me to act more like a girl than a boy. The kids thought of me as a sissy. By this I mean sensitive, polite, courteous, and obedient to my elders, especially females. This exclusion from having any friends my own age fostered my desire to be with adults as much as possible, since they were more receptive towards my sensitive nature. Of course, this really meant adult women, since I seldom encountered any adult males, except as tradesmen or the husbands of my aunt's friends, and most of the time I was shielded from them by either the maid, the cook, or my aunt. I always wanted to be with the adults, especially my aunt and her lady friends. I discovered at an early age that being with women was more interesting. In some other ways, my aunt allowed me freedoms that other children never experience. I never went to public school. Our inheritance allowed Aunt Lily, a certified school teacher, to quit her job in order to channel all her efforts towards my education and upbringing. Obviously, this one-on-one relationship meant we spent most of our days and evenings together. I was therefore further ahead of students my own age and well-versed in subjects about which they knew very little, if anything. I studied the classics, art, poetry, literature, and foreign languages. Social graces, courtesies, and manners were always a daily part of my education. In addition, I gained a working knowledge of the finer arts by joining my aunt at concerts, plays, art exhibits, and poetry readings. This made me more aware of adult female interests and assisted me greatly whenever I conversed with them. If sociologists are correct, then my environment was the reason I became what I am today. In my early childhood years, Auntie kept careful watch over me in order to shield me from what she considered negative influences. This meant I was never far from her sight. Where she went, so went I. This even included those special women's places that males dare not venture into for fear of being embarrassed. Each week, Auntie spent part of her leisure time at the beauty shop having her hair styled and her nails manicured. When she went, so did I. While she was having her hair done, I would sit quietly, watching how the women were transformed by the scissors, combs, and brushes. The fantasy of being fussed over and pampered at the hands of an adult woman enhanced the warm glow I felt just being there. Even at my age, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to their feminine, slanted conversations. This was their special domain, free of any intrusion by males. A place where the women could let their hair down and speak openly on subjects they wouldn't dare talk about in front of their husbands. I learned many things about the inner workings of the female mind while waiting for my aunt to have her hair done. In department stores and fashion boutiques, we would browse the finer dress and lingerie departments hand in hand. Whenever Auntie went shopping for dresses, skirts, blouses, or even lingerie, there I was, in the dressing room, sitting on the floor, with Auntie standing over me. Aunt Lily, for all her male-hating, was still a very beautiful woman with excellent tastes in clothing and always enjoyed looking her best. She once explained her attitude as, "I dress to please myself, no one else." Secretly, I think she enjoyed being admired by males so she could put them in their place, as she often did. Auntie never felt uncomfortable letting me see her try on clothes or in different states of undress. If a snooty saleswoman dared to look askance, my aunt either left the store immediately or asked for another saleslady. This closeness between us didn't change like it does for most boys until I was just past my 12th birthday. At which time, she finally decided I was too old to go along with her inside these special places for women only, not because she was ever embarrassed, but because the other women in the dressing areas were becoming nervous by my presence. I didn't realize till much later in my childhood how these shopping trips with my aunt would help me. She must have suspected, even though I myself didn't at the time, that I really enjoyed these excursions with her into the world of women's fashions. Aunt Lily was very popular and had many friends. When we visited the homes of her female friends, I, of course, went with her. She never left me in the hands of a sitter and also felt that it wasn't the responsibility of either the maid or the cook to watch me. Her lady friends eventually came to accept my constant presence at all of their social functions, even when their own children, some younger than I, would be outside playing together or had been left at home in the care of a babysitter. In the beginning, I would sit quietly and unnoticed, secretly listening to their conversations. Early on, Auntie had warned me never to speak out or to divulge anything I might have overheard. As the women gained confidence that their conversations would remain private, their fear of my exposing their secrets lessened and finally disappeared altogether. As I grew a little older, I was allowed to leave my chair and play with my miniature cars around the dining room table, never far from where Auntie sat, while the women talked. If their husbands were in attendance, they always adjourned to the family room, and the kids went out to play. No matter whose house we were visiting, the ladies stayed and talked while the men left to watch TV or play cards. After a while, involved in their conversations, they would totally forget I was crawling around the floor at their feet. One day, after Thanksgiving dinner and the cleanup had been completed, I was once again on the floor playing with my toys. I must have been about 7 at the time. One of my toy cars accidentally rolled under the long dining table completely out of sight. The women, all dressed up in their best holiday outfits and totally relaxed after the huge meal, had moved to the far end of the table so they could talk without being disturbed by the men who were again watching an endless series of football games. Not wishing to interrupt my aunt or her friends, I gently lifted the drape of the lace tablecloth and silently crawled under the table from the end opposite from where they sat. It was difficult to see where my toy car might have rolled because the tablecloth blocked out most of the light. After my eyes became accustomed to the semi-darkness, I began to search for my lost toy, crawling from one end of the table towards the other. Being extremely careful not to bump into any outstretched legs, I crawled through the forest of nylon-clad legs stretched before me towards where I supposed my toy had rolled. Suddenly, my progress was blocked by 2 sets of nylon-clad legs ahead and also behind me. Having nowhere to go, I was forced to sit and wait until my escape route reopened. Bored at having to wait, I looked around and inadvertently discovered I was able to see up the casually splayed legs of the 2 women on either side of me. Slipping lower to the carpet enabled me to easily see up past their spread knees, beyond where their nylons met the garters, all the way to where their thighs joined their bodies. A flashback of a previous visit with my aunt to a store dressing room enabled me to recall the name of the garment to which the garters were attached. A girdle. Most of the women, I later realized, didn't really need the benefits derived from a girdle. They just never dressed up without wearing one. Auntie later told me it was a Southern thing. At my young age, seeing up their legs wasn't attractive, but instead humorous. covering my mouth so as not to laugh and thereby give myself away. My eyes strained to see between one woman's open thighs and the other's. Looking under their casually displaced skirts, I was spellbound by the two different styles of girdles and panties they wore. In my mind, I tried to remember which women's legs were displayed before me, unsuccessfully. Oh, how wonderful it must feel against their skin to wear such beautiful underclothes, I silently mused. When my path finally reopened, I decided I needed to see more women's underwear. Silently sliding across the carpet, from chair to chair, I studied each woman's clothes in turn, making mental notes on how the garters attached to the welts of their nylons, the different patterns, shades, and colors. Knowing I shouldn't be there and nervous about being discovered, I began to turn around to make my escape when I gently bumped my left hip against the dangling pump of one of the women as she adjusted her position. I heard her say to her friends, "I'm sorry, I hope I didn't hurt whoever I just kicked." There was a momentary pause, and then, when they realized she hadn't kicked any of them, all 8 women, including Auntie, reached under the table, lifted the cloth, and peered into the now brightly lit area. I had just enough time to turn my eyes towards the carpet, acting as if I was searching for something. "Young man, what are you doing down there?" one of the ladies asked in a most suspicious voice. "Yes, what are you doing under the table?" demanded another. Trying to look and sound lost, I directed my answer towards my aunt. "Auntie, my red car rolled under one of these chairs and I couldn't find it because there wasn't enough light to see anything when the tablecloth was down. Please, could someone help me find it? It's my favorite." By chance, I had not only given the perfect response, but I had been polite in doing so. Obviously, the women concluded, if it was too dark to see my car, it was too dark to see anything else. They were immediately placated, a few tittering at themselves because they had jumped to their supposed mistaken conclusion that I was rudely staring up their legs, even though I really was. To make amends to me, but even more so to my aunt for implying that her nephew had been rude, they helped me locate my lost toy. One woman discovered that it had rolled against her char leg, obviously hidden from my view. My age, the lack of light, and their finding my toy reassured them that I was absolutely innocent of any possible wrongdoing. Politely thanking them for their help, I crawled out from under the table. As I left the immediate area, I overheard one woman state, "We must have been acting paranoid to even suggest that young Robert was being rude. If it had been anyone else's child, including my own 2 sons, it might have been true. Robert, however, is the most polite and courteous young boy I've ever met. Lily, you should be very proud of the way you've raised him. He's a perfectly mannered young Southern gentleman. I wish my sons were more sensitive like Robert. It's so hard today to raise a boy to be refined. They have somehow picked up the mistaken idea that manners are for sissies. He's also the prettiest little boy I know. He's sure to grow up into a handsome man. Well, maybe I'll be lucky and he'll be my son-in-law one day. My daughter could sure do worse." That night in my room, I reconstructed the incident in my mind, discovering that I enjoyed fooling the women and that I liked looking at their clothes. I liked the different colors. I prized how pretty each looked with its shiny colors and its lace edges. I especially enjoyed the sounds their nylons made as they crossed and recrossed their legs. The last thought I remember, before sleep overtook me, was, I sure wish I wore pretty clothes like my aunt and her friends do. Anytime the ladies got together, I would invent a reason, if caught, to be under their chairs. Most of the time, I went undiscovered. Whenever I was careless, the worst that happened was my being asked to get out from under the table and play somewhere else. In fact, it got to the point where if someone did kick another woman's foot, instead of apologizing to her friend, Ethy apologized to me, even if I wasn't under the table. Whenever this happened, the women would snicker amongst themselves. Oh, sometimes one or another might remember I could be down there and modestly adjusted the drape of her skirt or the way she sat. But for the most part, they either forgot about me, thought I was too young for it to matter. Aunt Lily, during her weekly quests for new attire, began asking me for my comments upon her selections. Since she seemed to value my opinion, I began to actively yet secretly study women's fashions. In order to do so, it was necessary to understand the different materials, cuts, style lengths, and colors of feminine apparel. The initial stages of my quest for feminine knowledge took the form of comparing women when they weren't conscious of my appraisal. I scrutinized the manner in which women dressed, how they walked, how they talked, and how they carried themselves. I spent every possible moment of free time from my normal studies secretly scanning department store catalogs and my Aunt Lily's women's magazines, paying particular attention to the clothing, shoes, and lingerie. I committed to memory all the various types and styles of feminine apparel. I studied any article describing the benefits of the materials from which women's garments were manufactured, in an effort to fully understand how these fabrics moved when worn. As I assimilated each new bit of information, I became even more aware of the various undergarments women wore to enhance their figures. The strangeness of many of these new garments caused my curiosity to peak. At first, I was totally confused, not being quite mature enough to discern why women would go through the discomfort, in my opinion, of wearing these strange items with all their straps, belts, and padding. In an effort to learn more about these strange garments, I would sneak into my aunt's room and browse through her closets and lingerie drawers whenever I felt it was safe. During one of these intrusions, I decided it was time that I learn the purpose or benefit women derived from these strange undergarments. Experience is the best teacher flashed through my mind. This was a motto I had often heard my aunt profess. Therefore, upon entering my aunt's bedroom, I took her advice and began slipping into my aunt's clothes. Selecting a bra, a pair of matching undies, a girdle, some sheer nylons, a dress, and some heels. I cross-dressed in my Aunt Lily's clothes. I must admit it wasn't as unpleasant as I had suspected to wear these straps, belts, or pads. Just strange. When I looked at my reflected image in the mirror, I felt silly. I didn't look at all like I had presupposed I would. Instead, I looked just like a silly little boy dressed in his aunt's oversized clothing. Of course, my hairstyle was that of a boy. In addition, I had not thought to fill the bra cups, thereby lessening the effect and making the dress hang improperly. The outfit I had selected didn't match. The dress was too big. The slip fell below the hem of the dress. I hadn't used makeup or any jewelry to enhance my features. I also didn't use the knowledge I had learned as to how a woman walked or stood or gestured. The total effect was ridiculous. Even though the sensations brought about by the silky materials were definitely pleasurable, I still felt foolish. I did learn how the clothes helped enhance a woman's figure, and since this was my initial purpose, I wasn't overly disappointed. Every now and again, I was struck by the desire to repeat my experiment. Each time I felt more pleased by the sensuousness of the clothing, I began to try on more and more clothes. Oh boy, don't I look pretty. Thanks for watching. Check out Patreon if you want to have early access to the other parts. If not, it will be online in a couple of days.